The morning chill crept under the thin fabric of my robe as I stood on the veranda of my house, clutching a cup of cold coffee. 68 years old, and I still wake up at 5 in the morning like there's another real estate appraisal due tomorrow. A habit that has stayed with me after 40 years on the job. Now, however, I just stare out at the deserted street where the cars of the early laborers occasionally pass by. My name is Perry Hackett. I once had a family, a wife, Laurel, and a daughter, Winship. Now all that's left are memories and stacks of photo albums I haven't opened since Laurel died of cancer 5 years ago. Our house is too big for one person. 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a kitchen where Laurel cooked her famous Sunday dinners. Now I dwell mostly in the study and bedroom. The rest of the rooms are mothballed like museum pieces. I set the empty cup on the veranda railing and headed into the house. Time to get dressed and go out for my daily walk. Not that I like walking, it's just that the doctor insisted on physical activity after my blood pressure started freaking out last year. Next to the front door hung a picture of Winship from my college graduation. A bright smile, eyes full of hope. I felt like the proudest father in the world that day. We were still talking then. The trouble started when Winship was a teenager. I missed her 16th birthday because of an urgent business trip to Seattle, appraising a complex of 12 apartment buildings for a major investor. It was an important contract that helped us pay for her first year of college. But Winship didn't realize that. All she saw was that her father chose work over her holiday. That was the beginning of the end. With each missed school concert, each parent-teacher conference that only Laurel attended, the chasm between us grew wider. I believed that providing for my family financially was my first priority. Now I realize how wrong I was. By the time Winship graduated from college, our conversations had become formal and strained. Laurel was the link that kept us from breaking up completely. She always defended me to my daughter. Your father works hard, so we don't need anything. But I could see the distrust in Winship's eyes. Then she met Quentin Lloyd, slim, with cold eyes and a condescending smile. He worked in corporate consulting and seemed to have been born in a 3-piece suit. From the first time we met, there was a mutual dislike between us. I saw him as someone who used people as stepping stones for his career. He saw me as an outdated model who didn't fit his idea of the modern world. Winship fell in love with his self-confidence and ambition. 8 months later, they announced their engagement. Laurel was happy. I kept quiet because I knew my opinion was of no interest to anyone here. The wedding was lavish. Quentin insisted on having the ceremony at the country club where his parents were members. I paid for everything, including a honeymoon in Bali. As I danced with my daughter at the wedding reception, she smiled genuinely at me for the first time in a long time. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. In that moment, I thought that maybe not all was lost, but hope died quickly. After the wedding, Quentin skillfully limited our communication. Phone conversations grew shorter. Dinner invitations were declined, citing busyness. When Laurel became ill, Winship would come to visit her mother, but always alone and for a short time. The last year of Laurel's life was filled with pain and quiet conversations at night. She knew she was dying and was most afraid of leaving me alone. "Promise me you'll try to make things work with Winship," she asked me a week before she died. I promised, not knowing how to fulfill that promise. At the funeral, Winship stood next to me, but there was a wall between us that could not be overcome by simple words of condolence. Quentin stood behind her like a bodyguard, making sure we weren't alone. 5 years had passed since the funeral. In that time, we'd only seen each other a few times. At Christmas the first year, then for Winship's birthday the following year. Each meeting was strained, like we were playing parts in a bad play. I tried calling. I wrote emails, sent holiday gifts. Sometimes Winship responded with a quick, "Thank you." Most of the time, she didn't say a word. And then, 3 months ago, I got a call from Emrys Kincaid, an old colleague of mine who still worked in real estate appraisal. "Perry," he said after the usual greetings, "I just appraised a house in Fremont. Guess who put in a bid to buy it?" I didn't bother to guess. Emrys always liked dramatic pauses. "Your daughter and her hubby," he continued. "Nice house, by the way. 3 stories overlooking the park. But the price. I think they're going to have to get into serious debt." I thanked Emrys for the information and immediately called my financial advisor, Winifred Pike. We met the next day at her office. "I want to set up a trust fund," I said. "Anonymous. to pay part of the cost of the house my daughter's buying. Winifred took off her glasses and put them on her desk. Perry, do you realize that if they find out about this, they might perceive it as an intrusion into their lives? They won't find out, I answered. Can you arrange for the money to come from an anonymous benefactor? I can, Winifred nodded. But I think a direct conversation would be a better solution. I shook my head. Straight talk with Quentin? It's like talking to a wall, with the only difference being that the wall doesn't look at you with contempt. 2 weeks later, the trust fund was set up, and half of the house's value, $620,000, was deposited into the real estate agency's account. According to Winifred's plan, the bank was to inform Winship and Quentin that an anonymous benefactor had paid part of the amount. I hoped they would be too happy about the mortgage reduction to ask questions. After another month, Emrys informed me that the deal was closed. Winship and Quentin became the owners of the house in Fremont. I felt a strange satisfaction, as if I had been indirectly involved in my daughter's life. That evening, I sat in my study for a long time going through old photographs. Here's Winship on her bicycle, her first ride without support wheels. Here's us at the beach. She's building a sandcastle and I'm helping with the towers. Here's a family photo at the amusement park. Laurel laughing, Winship holding a huge cotton candy machine, and me hugging them both. We were happy then, or I'd like to think so. I realized that my trust fund act was less of a help than an attempt to buy a place in my daughter's life. But I didn't see any other way. Quentin had created a wall around her, and I hoped my financial help would be the first step toward breaking it down. Maybe someday I could tell Winship the truth. Explain that I'd worked all those years, not because I loved my job more than hers, but because I wanted to provide her with a future she would never need. I wanted her to have opportunities that I didn't have at her age. But for now, I decided to observe from afar. I asked Emrys to keep me informed. When they would move in, how the renovations were going, if any. He agreed, though he looked at me with the same expression as Winifred, a mixture of sympathy and slight condemnation. And then, 2 weeks ago, the unexpected happened. In my mailbox, I found an envelope with a return address in Fremont. Inside was an invitation, an elegant card with gold embossing. Dear Dad, it said in Winship's handwriting, you are invited to a housewarming party next Saturday, starting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Love, Winship. I reread the invitation several times, not believing my eyes. Love. When was the last time I'd heard those words from my daughter? Had Quentin's name not been mentioned in the invitation, as if he had nothing to do with it? I called Emrys to see if the move had been finalized, and he confirmed. Winship and Quentin had moved in a week ago, so the invitation was for a real housewarming party. That night I couldn't sleep. I was filled with hope and fear at the same time. What if it was an olive branch? What if Winship had decided to give our relationship another chance? Or was it just a formality to invite my father so there would be no recriminations later? The next morning, I called Winifred to go over some of the details of the trust fund. I wanted to make sure Winship and Quentin didn't find out about my involvement. Winifred assured me that everything was organized as confidentially as possible. But Perry, she added, sooner or later the truth will come out. It always does. Not this time, I replied. Not until I decide to reveal it myself. After my conversation with Winifred, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the street. The tree across the street from the house Laurel and I had planted 30 years ago now towered over the roof. Life moves forward, even when it feels like you're stuck in the past. I've made a decision. I will go to the housewarming party. I'll buy a nice gift, something for the house, practical but not too expensive so as not to arouse suspicion. And I'll be polite to Quentin, even if it costs me all my self-control. This may be my last chance to mend my relationship with my daughter. If it fails, I'll stop trying. I'll let her live her own life without an annoying father who constantly reminds her of past mistakes. But for now, I have hope. Thin, fragile, like the first ice on a pond, but hope nonetheless. And for her, I'm willing to take a risk. The housewarming invitation lay on my bedside table like a foreign object from another universe. I looked at it every morning, trying to unravel its hidden meaning. Winship's handwriting had become more elegant over the years, but I still recognized the distinctive slant of the letters that she'd inherited from Laurel. Love, Winship. That phrase kept me on my toes. In the 5 years since Laurel's death, none of my daughter's rare letters ended with those words. She usually signed simply with her name, sometimes adding a formal best wishes. Love, however, remained unspoken, buried beneath layers of resentment and misunderstanding. A week before the housewarming party, I decided to buy a gift. Not too expensive, so as not to arouse suspicion, but significant enough to show that I was serious about the invitation. It took me 3 days and 7 store visits before I found what I was looking for, a set of 3 antique Fremont maps in wooden frames. The maps dated from 1910, 1940, and 1980, showing how the city had changed over time. The clerk at the antique shop, an older woman with kind eyes, wrapped my purchase in a velvet cloth before placing it in a box. "A wonderful gift for a new home," she said, "especially if the owners appreciate history." Winship had always loved history. As a child, she could spend hours listening to stories about our family's past. I remembered her sitting by the fireplace with her knees pulled up to her chin while I told her about my grandfather, who came to America from Ireland with $10 in his pocket and a suitcase of books. "And then what happened, Daddy?" she asked every time I paused, and I continued illuminating the story with details a 5-year-old could understand and remember. When Winship turned 7, we started playing archaeologists. I buried treasures in the garden. Coins, small figurines, sometimes beads that Laurel no longer wore. Winship, armed with a toy trowel and brush, methodically unearthed them and then recorded her findings in a special notebook we called the Expedition Journal. This game continued for several years until Winship became a teenager and found more adult pursuits. I was sure she would enjoy the maps. I just hoped Quentin wouldn't ridicule my choice. I could almost hear his condescending voice. "Maps? In the age of Google Maps? How cute and old-fashioned." Thoughts of Quentin led me to the question that had been bothering me since I received the invitation. Did he know about it? The tone of the letter, the absence of his name next to Winship's signature, all indicated that the invitation had been sent without his knowledge or approval. It made me even more nervous. 3 days before the housewarming party, I called my daughter to confirm my arrival. The phone rang for a long time before she answered, in a panting voice as if she was running to the phone. Dash, dash. "Hello? Winship, it's Daddy." Pause. I could hear her breathing, and in the background, the muffled sounds of movement. Dash, Daddy, hi. "Yeah, a little busy right now. Unpacking boxes." "Oh, I see. I just wanted to tell you that I got your invitation and I'll be there on Saturday." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Okay, we'll expect you at 3. Can I get you anything? Maybe some wine or—" "No, I don't need anything. Just, come over." She wanted to end the conversation, it was obvious. I restrained myself from asking more questions, from prolonging the awkwardness of the moment. "All right, see you Saturday, Winship." "See you Saturday, Daddy." She hung up without saying love or even bye. I remained sitting in the chair, clutching the phone in my hand, trying to interpret every intonation of her voice. Was she really just busy? Or was she nervous about inviting me over? Maybe regretting sending the invitation? On the day of the housewarming party, I woke up at 5 in the morning, as usual. It was still dark outside the window, but I couldn't sleep. I went out on the veranda with a cup of coffee and watched the first rays of sunlight color the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was times like this that I miss Laurel especially. She loves sunrises. "A new day is a new opportunity, Perry," she would say, hugging me from behind as we greeted the morning together. What would she say today? Probably supportive. Laurel always believed in the possibility of reconciliation, even when I was already down. I'd carefully chosen my clothes for the trip to Fremont. Not too formal. It's a house party after all. But not too sloppy, either. I wanted to give the impression of someone who respected the occasion. I settled on navy blue slacks, a light blue shirt, and a gray cashmere sweater that Laurel had given me the last Christmas before her illness. The sweater had thinned slightly at the elbows, but it was still elegant. As I wrapped the gift, I thought long and hard about the note. What to write? Congratulations on the housewarming seemed too formal. Love, Dad seemed too forced given our current relationship. I finally settled on a simple phrase: new beginnings in a new home. Daddy. Not overly emotional, but with a hint of the possibility of change. Fremont was about an hour from my house. I decided to leave at noon so that I would have time to eat lunch in town and not arrive hungry. In addition, leaving early gave me a chance to prepare myself psychologically to meet my daughter and son-in-law. I listened to classical music along the way. Chopin, Laurel's favorite composer. She taught me to recognize the nuances of his works, to hear not just the notes but the emotion embedded in each melody. The music was soothing, helping to organize thoughts that jumped from hope to fear and back again. Fremont greeted me with a sunny day and a light breeze that moved the leaves of the trees along the road. The city was smaller than the one I lived in, but with character. Old buildings juxtaposed with modern architecture, creating a unique look. I stopped at a small cafe in the center of town and ordered a chicken sandwich and tea. As I ate, my thoughts went back to Winship. I remember the first time I held her in my arms, a small bundle with a red wrinkled face. She screamed so loudly that the nurses smiled. "Your daughter has great lungs." And then there were the first steps, the first words, the first day of school. I walked her to the gate, holding her hand, and she braved it, though I could feel her fingers trembling. "It's going to be okay, Butterfly," I said, using the nickname I'd given her when she'd first learned to walk, and fluttered around the room constantly, never stopping for a second. "Promise?" she asked, looking at me with her serious eyes. "I promise," I replied. And in that moment, I truly believed that I could protect her from anything in the world. There was once a bond between us that nothing could break. What happened? Work, business trips, missed birthdays, and school plays all mattered, of course. But there was something else. Something I didn't understand then and don't understand now. After lunch, I drove down Fremont's main street, looking at the storefronts and passers-by. It was only 3:30, still half an hour before the party started. Too early to arrive, but too late to find something else to do. I decided to drive by the Winship house, just to look without going inside. Emrys was telling the truth. The house was impressive, 3 stories high, with large windows and a manicured garden, white walls, dark blue roof, red front door, a classic combination that would never go out of style. There were several cars parked in front of the house, apparently early guests or party helpers. I drove past, trying not to attract attention, and stopped around the corner. Looking at my watch, it was only 23. I decided to walk a little to pass the time. The neighborhood was quiet, with neat houses and manicured lawns, a typical place for a young, middle-class family. Except that without my help, Winship and Quentin wouldn't have been able to afford a house in a neighborhood like this. Quentin made good money, but not that much. They probably planned to pay the mortgage for decades. My anonymous help cut that time frame in half. I walked around the block and headed back toward my daughter's house. The clock read 10 to 3, still a little early, but acceptable for showing up. I could have sat in the car for a few more minutes, but I decided to walk at a slower pace. It would make the time pass more easily. As I turned onto the street where the Winship house was located, I noticed 2 people on the front lawn. They were standing a few feet from the entrance, and even from a distance I recognized them, Quentin and Winship. They were clearly arguing. Quentin was waving his arms around, and Winship stood with her arms crossed over her chest in a defensive posture. I slowed my step, not wanting to get involved in the conflict, but also not wanting to lose the opportunity to see them interact without witnesses. In all the years of their marriage, I'd had a suspicion that behind closed doors, Quentin was nowhere near as charming as he was in public. They stood far enough away from me, but the wind carried scraps of their conversation. Quentin's voice sounded harsh, with a note of disdain I'd heard before when he spoke of people he considered beneath him. "I can't believe you invited him without my knowledge." Dash came to me. Winship replied something I couldn't hear, but her posture spoke of tension and discomfort. Quentin continued, his voice louder. "He's going to get in the way, ask uncomfortable questions, spoil the impression of my colleagues." So I was right. The invitation had been sent without his knowledge or approval. Perhaps it was an act of small rebellion on Winship's part, an attempt to show independence in a marriage that seemed to be increasingly repressing her. I stopped, not wanting to be seen. They clearly weren't expecting visitors this early, and my appearance could only make matters worse. I retreated around the corner of the nearest house, still having a view of their lawn but remaining invisible. Quentin grabbed Winship's arm above the elbow, pulled her to him, and said something to her face. His fingers dug into her skin even through the fabric of her blouse. I felt anger rising in me, an instinctive, paternal anger. No one has the right to treat my daughter like this. Winship broke free of his grip and took a step back. He's my father, I heard her voice become suddenly firm. And this is my home too. I have the right to invite whoever I want. Your father? Quentin almost spit out the words. The same father who missed half your life because of his precious job? Who shows up once a year with a duty gift and then disappears again? Don't make me laugh. I froze, stunned by his words. Was this really what Winship had said about me? Or was it Quentin's interpretation, distorted by his own dislike? Winship lowered her head, her shoulders slumped. There was so much weariness and defeat in that gesture that I wanted to come out of my hiding place and protect her. But I knew that would only make things worse. She had to deal with this conflict on her own, no matter how painful it was. He's the only parent I have left, she said quietly. And I'm not asking you to love him. Just be nice, for one day at least. Quentin laughed, a cold, unpleasant laugh. You want me to pretend to respect a man who has systematically let you down your whole life? Who didn't even bother to help us buy a house, even though he had the money? I clenched my fists. If only he knew. We didn't ask him for help, Winship reminded me. You said yourself we didn't need his money. Because I knew he'd say no. Quentin shouted. It's better to refuse right away than to be refused, isn't it? Winship shook his head and turned toward the house. The guests will be here soon. Let's get this conversation over with. Quentin grabbed her shoulder and turned her around. We'll finish when I say so. And remember, your precious daddy will be out of here in an hour. I'll find a way to kick him out, don't worry. Winship didn't answer. She just stood there looking past Quentin as if he were invisible. Then she freed herself from his grip and took a quick step toward the house. Quentin stared after her, his face contorted in a grimace of anger and contempt. Then he adjusted his shirt collar, smoothed his hair, and followed her. I was alone on the street, shocked by what I had seen and heard. So this is what their marriage was really like? Not the idol they displayed at the rare family reunions, but a toxic relationship where Quentin controlled and humiliated my daughter? The clock struck 3 sharp. It was time to go to the housewarming party, but now I knew I wasn't going to get a warm welcome, at least not from Quentin. He planned to be rid of me within the hour. Well, we'll see who outplayed who, I thought, heading toward my daughter's house with a gift under my arm and a new determination in my eyes. I approached the house with my head held high, clutching the gift under my arm. The box of cards seemed too light for such a meaningful moment. Maybe I should have bought something more substantial, a set of dishes or a set of kitchen appliances, but it was too late to change my mind. Cars, mostly expensive sedans and premium SUVs, lined the driveway. I recognized Quentin's black Lexus, parked closest to the house. Next to it was a silver Volvo that probably belonged to Winship. She'd had a small Honda 5 years ago, but apparently with the rise in social status had come a change of car. Muffled music and the hum of voices came from the house. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Seconds flowed, adding up to a minute. I was about to ring it again when the door swung open. Standing on the threshold was Winship. Her blonde hair was gathered into an elegant bun, exposing her thin neck. She was wearing a simple blue dress that accentuated the color of her eyes, the same color as Laurel's. She looked tired, but her face brightened for a moment when she saw me. "Daddy," she said, and there was so much in that word: surprise, uncertainty, maybe even a glimmer of joy. "Hello, Winship," I smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." She hesitated for a second, then stepped forward and hugged me awkwardly. The hug was short, but genuine. I smelled the familiar scent of her perfume, the same perfume she'd been using since college. "Come on in," she said, stepping back inside. The guests had already gathered. I stepped through the threshold and found myself in a large, high-ceilinged hallway. To the right was the living room, filled with people with glasses in their hands. To the left was the dining room, with a long table laden with snacks and drinks. "It's a beautiful house," I said sincerely. "Very spacious and bright." Winship nodded, accepting the compliment. We fell in love with it at first sight, she replied. Especially those windows in the backyard. I held out a gift to her. This is for you, in honor of the housewarming. She took the box and set it on the small table by the front door. Thank you. I'll open it later, okay? Come on, I'll introduce you to the guests. We headed into the living room and I felt the stares of those present. Most of them were younger than me, Winship and Quentin's age, dressed in stylish but understated clothes. A few were older, perhaps Quentin's co-workers or parents of friends. Winship led me through the room, introducing me to one couple or the other. Names floated past me: Odelia and Brooks, Anissa and Tellerico, Whitney and Talbot. I nodded, shook hands, exchanged casual phrases about the weather and what a lovely home the newlyweds had purchased. Quentin was nowhere to be seen, and I began to hope that perhaps our meeting would pass without conflict. But that hope died when I saw him emerge from the kitchen with a tray of canapes. His eyes narrowed when he noticed me. The tray shook slightly in his hands, but he quickly regained his balance and smiled a cold, tortured smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Oh, Perry," he said with feigned surprise. "What a surprise!" Winship tensed beside me. "I invited Daddy to the housewarming party," she said. "Didn't I tell you?" Quentin set the tray on the nearest table and walked toward us. He was wearing a light gray suit without a tie, which fit perfectly, emphasizing his slim figure. "No, darling, you didn't mention it," he said, keeping his eyes on me. "But I'm sure it's just a simple misunderstanding, isn't it?" He put his hand on Winship's shoulder in a possessive gesture. I noticed her tense slightly under his touch. "I sent the invitation a week ago," Winship said, avoiding his gaze, "and Dad called to confirm he was coming." "I thought you heard our conversation." Quentin squeezed her shoulder, and I noticed her wince slightly in pain. "Apparently not," he gritted through his teeth, saving his smile for the guests who might be watching us. "But while you're here, Perry, let me offer you something to drink." "Whiskey, if you have it," I replied, deciding not to escalate the situation. "Sure," Quentin nodded. "Winship, would you be so kind as to keep our guest while I get him a drink?" He strode off in the direction of the bar located in the corner of the living room. Winship exhaled as if relieved of a weight. "I'm sorry about that," she whispered. "He's a little stressed about organizing the party." I restrained myself from saying that Quentin's tension had a different reason. Instead, I squeezed her hand. "It's all right. Don't worry." Quentin returned with 2 glasses, a whiskey for me and something that looked like a martini for himself. He handed me a glass with an insincere smile. "Here's to the new house," he said, raising his glass. I nodded and took a sip. The whiskey was good expensive, with a rich flavor and a slight smoky aftertaste. Quentin knew his way around alcohol, I had to admit. "So, Perry," he began as Winship stepped aside to greet the new guests. "How you doing? Still passing the days in your big empty house?" There was a barely concealed sneer in his voice. I kept my expression neutral. "Yes, the house feels empty without Laurel," I answered calmly, "but I have something to do." "Oh, I'm sure you do," Quentin nodded. "A man your age needs something to fill his time. Gardening, crossword puzzles, or maybe you're still trying to play businessman." I felt anger rising in me, but I held back. I shouldn't have given him a reason for conflict. "I do real estate appraisal consulting," I said, "and I do a little traveling." "That's nice," Quentin said. "You know, I always wondered, if you were so good at real estate, why didn't you help us buy a house? I mean, we spent a lot of money on the mortgage." I almost choked on my whiskey. If only he'd known that I'd paid for half of the house. "You didn't ask for help," I answered in his own words. "And as far as I'm concerned, you did a great job. The house is gorgeous." Quentin snorted, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. He wanted to provoke me, to make me lose my temper in front of my guests. But I wasn't going to give him that pleasure. At that moment, a middle-aged couple approached us, a lush blonde in a bright pink dress, and a balding man with an impressive belly. "Quentin!" the woman exclaimed. "This is a marvelous house. How did you manage to find such a treasure?" Quentin instantly switched into charming host mode. "Evelyn Gordon, glad you could make it," he smiled. "Yes, we're lucky to have this house. And the financing, too. The bank offered excellent terms." "Speaking of banks," Gordon interjected, "you wouldn't believe what's happening to interest rates." I took a moment to make a discreet exit. I wanted to see the house. The fact that I had invested a considerable amount of money in it gave me some moral right to a tour. Besides, I needed time to collect my thoughts after my conversation with Quentin. I walked through the dining room into the kitchen, a spacious one with modern appliances and an island in the middle. A door led from here to the backyard, where several guests were enjoying the cool evening air. Back in the hallway, I climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was stacked with boxes. Obviously, they hadn't finished unpacking yet. 4 doors led to different rooms, probably bedrooms and an office. I didn't look inside, not wanting to disturb their personal space any more than necessary. As I walked back downstairs, I noticed Winship standing at the foot of the stairs. She was watching me with an unreadable expression on her face. "Looking around the property?" she asked without rebuke, but with a slight wariness. "Just wanted to see the whole house," I replied. "It's really beautiful, Winship. You've made an excellent choice." Her face softened. "Thank you. She didn't have time to finish the sentence. Quentin emerged from the living room, his face contorted with anger when he saw me on the stairs. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "Are you looking for something valuable to appraise?" "Quentin!" exclaimed Winship. "Stop it." "No. I want to know why your father is wandering around our house," Quentin insisted, "especially when he wasn't invited." There was a heavy pause. Several of the nearest guests were silent, listening to our conversation. "Winship invited me," I said quietly, walking down to them. Without my knowledge, Quentin cut him off. "And I'm the owner of this house, you know." Winship turned pale. "Let's not make a scene in front of the guests," she whispered. But Quentin was too angry, or perhaps he'd had too much to drink, to stop. "I'll tell you straight, Perry," he raised his voice. "You weren't invited. Do you understand? Your presence here is a mistake." The music continued to play, but there was an awkward silence in the living room. All the guests were now looking at us. I could see the confusion and curiosity on their faces. Winship put her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Please don't," she pleaded. Quentin shook off her hand. "No, let everyone know. This man," he pointed at me, "was a terrible father who always put work before family. He missed half of his daughter's life because of endless business trips. And now he's trying to gain her trust when all is lost." I kept my composure, even though there was a storm raging inside me. "I think I'd better leave," I said in a steady voice. "Winship, thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry it had to be like this." I turned to leave, but Quentin grabbed my arm. "Yeah, go away," he hissed, "and don't come back. We don't need you." I carefully released my hand from his grip. "You shouldn't touch me, Quentin," I said quietly, especially in front of witnesses. His eyes widened with rage, but his instinct for self-preservation prevailed. He took a step back. "Get out of my house," he said, emphasizing the word my. I nodded and headed for the door. Winship followed me, her face a mixture of shame and despair. "Daddy, please forgive him," she whispered when we were on the porch. "He didn't mean to." "It's all right," I interrupted her. "It wasn't your fault, Winship." "I'll call you tomorrow," she promised, looking over her shoulder as if afraid Quentin might show up at any moment. I nodded, knowing that that call probably wasn't going to happen. Then I turned and walked to my car, keeping my back straight and my head up. I would not let this man see that his words had hurt me. Sitting in my car, I watched the house through the windshield. Through the large windows, I could see the silhouettes of the guests resuming their conversations after the dramatic scene. Winship stood at the door, looking in my direction. Then she turned and disappeared inside. I started the engine and drove slowly away from the house. My heart was pounding hard in my chest, adrenaline still circulating in my blood. I needed to calm down before continuing on my way. I stopped a few blocks away from the house and pulled out my cell phone. The number for Winifred Pike, my financial advisor, was on speed dial. She answered after the third ringtone. "Perry, is everything okay?" "Not really," I answered. "Can you get in touch with Daryl?" Daryl Galvin had been my lawyer for 25 years. He knew about the trust fund and all its terms. "So?" "Of course," Winifred said. "But what happened?" I briefly described the events at the housewarming party without going into emotional detail. "I want Daryl to come to the Winship house right now," I said, "with the trust fund documents." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Perry," Winifred began cautiously, "are you sure this is a good idea? Revealing your involvement in such an emotional moment could only make things worse." "I will not allow this man to humiliate my daughter in a house I helped buy," I said firmly. And I won't let him spread lies about me not supporting the family? Winifred sighed. Good. I'll call Daryl. But Perry, think again. Revenge is not the best counselor. It's not revenge, I countered. It's the truth. And the truth must be known. After my conversation with Winifred, I sat in the car, watching the empty street. My thoughts revolved around Winship and how she would react to the news. Would my meddling in their finances push her further away? Wouldn't she perceive it as an attempt to control her life? But the alternative, letting Quentin continue to manipulate her, isolate her from her family, humiliate her, was unacceptable. Perhaps the knowledge of my help would give her some independence, make her less dependent on her husband. 45 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Daryl. I'm at the house, he said. Winifred explained everything. Are you sure you want to go this way? Absolutely, I answered. Do as we agreed. I will. Stay on the line. I heard Daryl get out of the car and approach the house. The doorbell rang, muffled voices, then the sound of the door opening. Good evening. Daryl's voice sounded professional and detached. I'm looking for Mr. Quentin Lloyd. I'm Daryl Galvin, representing Mr. Perry Hackett. A pause, then an unintelligible response. Probably Quentin's. I have information that has a direct bearing on the financing of this house, Daryl continued. I believe you'll be interested in the details. Another pause, then Daryl was obviously invited inside because the connection got worse, the voices muffled. I waited, clutching the phone in my hand. 5 minutes. 10. Then Daryl's voice came back. Perry, I need you here. Now. I didn't ask any questions. I started the car and headed back toward Winship and Quentin's house. On the way, I tried to imagine what was going on inside. How did Quentin react to the news of my financial involvement? How did Winship take the news that half the cost of their house was paid for by her father? As I pulled up to the house, I noticed that most of the guest cars were gone. Perhaps the scene between Quentin and me had ended the party, or perhaps the guests had begun to disperse naturally. Daryl's car was parked in front of the house, a black sedan that he favored for its inconspicuousness. I parked and got out, feeling the tension return with a redoubled force. The front door was ajar, and I entered without ringing the bell. The living room was empty except for 3 people. Winship sat on the couch, pale and motionless like a statue. Daryl stood by the fireplace holding a file folder. And Quentin. Quentin was kneeling in front of the couch, his face a mixture of horror and despair. When I walked in, all 3 of them turned toward me. Winship's eyes were red from crying. Daryl nodded at me with professional restraint. And Quentin. There was panic in his eyes. Perry, he said in a hoarse voice, rising to his feet. I didn't know. Obviously, I answered coldly. Mr. Hackett has briefed your wife and you on the details of the trust fund, Daryl said. As you now realize, half the cost of this house was paid for by the anonymous benefactor that is Mr. Hackett, Dad. Why? Winship asked quietly. Why didn't you tell us? I wanted to help, I answered simply. No strings attached, no obligation on your part. Quentin took a step toward me, his face contorted with pleading. Perry, please forgive me for what I said. I was wrong. You're a great father. I didn't realize. You understood perfectly well, I interrupted him. You just didn't know all the facts. We can fix this, Quentin continued, moving closer. You'll always be welcome in our home. We'll have lunch together every Sunday. We'll be a real family. He knelt down in front of me, holding out his hands in a pleading gesture. Please, Perry, I'm sorry. I'll do anything you want. I looked down at him, feeling not triumph, but deep fatigue and disappointment. This man didn't love my daughter. He loved the house, the status, the money. And now that he realized I controlled part of his financial well-being, he was willing to do anything to placate me. Stand up, I said. You're humiliating not only yourself, but my daughter with your behavior. Quentin rose slowly, his face expressing embarrassment and fear. Winship watched us, her eyes widened with shock. I'm not for sale, Quentin, I said, looking him straight in the eye. The house stays with the daughter, but apologies can't buy our relationship. You showed your true colors tonight, and no amount of money can change who you are. There was a heavy silence in the living room. My words crumbled like slabs of stone against the fragile foundation of false decency. Quentin froze in front of me, still on his knees, his face a mask of horror and incomprehension. He hadn't expected rejection. A man accustomed to getting everything he wanted had discovered that some things could not be bought with even the sincerest of apologies. Winship rose from the couch and slowly approached us, her eyes a storm of emotion. Shock, confusion, resentment, maybe even a glimmer of respect. "Daddy," she whispered, "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you have to do it in secret?" I looked at my daughter, feeling warmth and pain in my chest at the same time. She was so much like Laurel in that moment, the same tilt of her head, the same expression in her eyes as she tried to solve a complex riddle. "I knew that direct help would be rejected," I replied, "especially by him." I nodded at Quentin, who still couldn't come to his senses. "But $620,000, her voice shook. "That's half of my savings," I said calmly. "The other half will be yours when I die. Everything I have is for you, Winship. Always has been and always will be." Quentin finally rose from his knees, shaking off his pants with a nervous gesture. His face took on a calculating expression I knew all too well. "Perry, let's not get heated," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "We're all a little emotional today. Why don't we sit down and talk about this like adults?" Daryl, who had been watching the scene silently all this time, coughed delicately. "Mr. Hackett, the trust fund documents are ready to be handed over as you requested," he said, holding out the folder to Winship. "You are now officially notified that half of the value of this house was paid for by your father through an anonymous trust fund." Winship accepted the folder with trembling hands and looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Pooey, all these years," she whispered, "you continued to take care of me, even when I pushed you away." The last three guests entered the living room, apparently lingering after the general exodus. Their eyes widened at the sight of the strange scene. Quentin with a confused face, Winship with tears in his eyes, me and Daryl with official papers. We should probably get going," said the middle-aged woman I vaguely remembered as Quentin's co-worker awkwardly. "Thank you for a lovely evening." "No, wait," Winship said suddenly, her voice growing stronger. "I want you to know the truth." Quentin turned even paler. "Winship, dear, I don't think this is the right time." "It's the right time," she cut in with a force I'd never heard in her voice before. My husband had just publicly humiliated my father at our housewarming party. A father who had secretly paid half the cost of this house from us. The guests looked around, clearly shocked by this revelation. Among them was an elderly couple, probably the parents of a friend, and a young man who looked too young to be Quentin's co-worker. "Perry, I think we can work this out in the family circle," Quentin tried to intervene, but his voice sounded uncertain. "We don't have a family circle," Winship replied, looking him straight in the eye. "You destroyed it yourself today." Her words fell into the silence of the room like stones into a pond, creating diverging circles of shock and embarrassment. I'd never seen Winship confront her husband so openly. There was always just quiet awkwardness, surrendered objections, and a dumbfounded stare. An elderly woman from the group of guests stepped forward, her face expressing sympathy. "Winship, my dear, if you need to talk." "Thank you, Beatrice," Winship replied, smiling weakly. "I'll manage. But I think the party is officially over." The guests awkwardly said their goodbyes and left, leaving the four of us, me, Winship, Quentin, and Daryl, who still maintained his professional equanimity, though I could see a spark of approval in his eyes. "I think my presence is no longer required," Daryl said. "Perry, I'll be in the car." I nodded, grateful for his tact. After he left, the room was silent again, heavy and dense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Quentin was the first to break it, his voice sounding unexpectedly harsh. "Are you satisfied now?" He turned to me. "You ruined my reputation in front of my colleagues and friends." "You ruined your own reputation," Winship replied before I could open my mouth. "By your behavior, by your treatment of my father, by your lies." Quentin looked at her with ill-concealed contempt. "You always defended him, even when he left you for a job, and now you're willing to betray me for money." "It's not the money," Winship said quietly. "It's what's behind it. Dad sacrificed half his savings to help us without expecting anything in return. And you kneeled before him as soon as you learned of his contribution. That didn't make you grateful. It made you a coward. Her words hit me as hard as they did Quentin. I never realized she saw the situation so clearly. Perhaps I had underestimated my daughter all these years. Quentin turned abruptly and headed for the bar, where he poured himself a full glass of whiskey. "Ah, fine," he said, taking a big sip. "You two have finally found common ground. Congratulations." Winship shook her head slowly. "This isn't about us, Quentin. It's about you. It's who you turned out to be today." She walked over to me, and for the first time in a long time, she really looked me in the eyes. I saw in them not only the pain, but the strength she may have inherited from me. "Daddy, I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem enough." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, allowing myself a slight smile. "Just know that I'm always here for you, no matter what happens." Quentin snorted but didn't dare intervene. He watched us like a predator waiting for the moment to attack. I looked around, noticing how the impeccable order of the party had turned into chaos. Uneaten appetizers on the tables, abandoned glasses, crumpled napkins on the floor. The perfect housewarming party had turned into a disaster, but maybe it was for the best. Sometimes you have to go through destruction to start building something new and real. "I have to go," I said, sensing that my presence was only making things more difficult for Winship. "Daryl is waiting for me." "Stay," she asked suddenly. "Please." Her request took me by surprise. In all the years since Laurel's death, she had never once asked me to stay. It was usually the opposite. Short visits, hurried goodbyes, obvious relief when I left. "Winship, I don't think this is a good idea," I said cautiously, glancing at Quentin, who was sipping his whiskey somberly. "You two need to talk privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Quentin said sharply. "You heard what your father said. The house stays with you. Everyone is happy." Winship turned slowly toward him, her face suddenly calm. "It's not about the house," she said. "It's never been about him. It's about you showing your true colors tonight, and I'm not sure I can live with that man under the same roof." Quentin froze, the glass halfway to his lips. Panic flashed in his eyes as he finally realized he'd lost control of the situation. "You can't be serious," he said, trying to smile. "We're just tired. Tomorrow things will look different." Maybe," Winship said, but there was no confidence in her voice. "Right now I want to talk to my father. Alone." Quentin looked at her, then at me, clearly trying to assess the situation and find a way to regain his advantage. But even his dodgy mind couldn't seem to come up with a strategy. "Fine," he finally squeezed out. "You two talk. I think I'll take a walk. I need some fresh air." He set the glass down and headed out, trying to keep his dignity, though his shoulders were tense and his gait too mechanical. When the door closed behind him, Winship took a deep breath, as if she'd been holding her breath the whole time. "I'm sorry about this circus," she said, "for the way he treated you, for all those years." I shook my head. "You have nothing to apologize for, Winship. I'm the one who should be apologizing. For not being there when you needed me, for letting work come between us. But you always took care of us," she said quietly. "About Mom, about me. Even when I was estranged, you continued." Her voice trembled, and I could see the tears glistening in her eyes again. I wanted to go over and hug her, but I wasn't sure if she was ready for that. It had been too many years since we'd really hugged. Winship made the choice for me. She bridged the distance between us and hugged me tightly, resting her face against my shoulder like she used to do as a child when she was upset or scared. "I missed you, Daddy," she whispered. "Even when I was angry. Even when I pushed you away. I always missed you." I hugged her back, feeling something break down inside the wall I'd built around my heart after Laurel's death to protect myself from the new pain, from losing my daughter, who was my last anchor in this world. We stood like that for a few minutes, not saying a word, just letting time and tears wash away years of misunderstanding and resentment. Then Winship pulled away, wiping her eyes. "What now?" she asked. "With the house? With Quentin? With us?" I led her over to the couch and we sat next to each other as we hadn't sat in years. "The house is yours," I said. As I said, my help had no conditions. As for Quentin, that's your choice, Winship. I can't and won't decide for you. What about us? She looked at me with hope and fear at the same time. I wondered. It would have been easy to say that everything would be okay, that we'd finally be a family again. But I knew that real relationships weren't built on empty promises. We'll start over, I said, day by day. No pressure, no expectations. Just, learn to be in each other's lives again. She nodded, accepting my answer. It was only fair. We sat in a silence that, for the first time in a long time, wasn't awkward or tense. Then Winship suddenly smiled. You never opened your present, she said. I saw you had brought something. I looked around and noticed the box on the table by the entrance where Winship had left it. It's not important right now, I said. No, it is important, she insisted, rising, especially now. She fetched the box and held it out to me. I carefully unwrapped the package, trying not to tear the paper, a habit Laurel had always found amusing. Winship watched me open the box and pull out 3 antique Fremont maps in wooden frames. Her eyes widened with surprise. Daddy, this is beautiful, she breathed out. I was just thinking about what to decorate the living room wall with. I remember how much you loved history, I said, feeling oddly relieved that she liked the gift. These maps show how the city has changed over the last 100 years. 1910th, 40th, and 80th. Winship read the dates on the maps. A whole history in 3 images. I thought it was a fitting gift for a new home, I said. A new chapter in your life. In our lives, she corrected, and there was so much hope in that little correction that it took my breath away. We heard the front door open. Quentin came back in, his face withdrawn, his eyes avoiding our gaze. I'll sleep in the guest bedroom, he said without looking at Winship. We need to talk tomorrow, when emotions have subsided. Winship nodded without saying a word. Quentin walked up the stairs, his steps heavy, as if he were carrying a huge weight on his shoulders. When he was out of sight, Winship turned to me. You were right, she said quietly. You can't buy a relationship. Not with money, not with apologies. They have to be earned through everyday actions and choices. I took her hand in mine, struck by a wisdom I hadn't seen in her before. Perhaps because I'd never given her a chance to show that wisdom. That goes for me too, I said. To us. I can't undo the past with one act, no matter how generous. But you can start building the future, she replied. We both can. I nodded, feeling something warm blossom in my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt since Laurel had gotten sick. Hope, not the desperate hope of a drowning man grasping at straws, but the quiet confidence that things could get better. I think Daryl's waiting, I said, glancing at my watch. I have to go. Will you call tomorrow? Winship asked, the same uncertainty in her voice that she'd had as a child when she'd asked me if I'd be back in time for her school play. I would, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, it was a promise I was determined to keep, even if the world turned upside down. We hugged again, and this time the embrace was longer, tighter, as if we both didn't want to let go of our newfound connection. Sydney, thank you for not giving up on me, she whispered, even when I gave you every reason to do so. I'm your father, I replied simply. I'm not for sale. The house stays yours, but our relationship can't be bought with apologies. It's worth more than any money. She pulled away, smiling through her tears. See you tomorrow, Daddy. See you tomorrow, Butterfly, I replied, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. And as I walked out of the house into the chill of the night where Daryl was waiting for me, I knew I had made the right choice. Not just today, but 3 months ago when I decided to secretly help my daughter. Not to buy her love or favor, but because it was the right thing to do. Because despite our differences, she was my daughter. The only thing left of my past life. The only thing worth building a future one for. A heavy silence hung in the living room after my words. I'm not selling. The house stays with my daughter, but our relationship can't be bought with apologies. Quentin looked at me in amazement, unaccustomed to rejection. Winship seemed shocked, too, her eyes darting between me and her husband. I turned around and left the house where the party was still simmering a short time later. Daryl was waiting for me in the car, his professional face expressionless. Let's go, I said briefly, sitting down in the front seat. Daryl nodded and started the engine. We drove silently out of the Fremont neighborhood. It wasn't until we were on the highway that he asked, "Did everything go according to plan?" "Even better," I replied, looking out the window at the night scenery passing by. Quentin had shown his true colors, and Winship saw it. Daryl hummed understandingly. We'd known each other long enough not to need more words. 25 years of friendship had taught us to understand each other. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked as we turned toward my neighborhood. I shook my head. "Not today. Too much has happened. I need to think it over." "I understand," Daryl nodded. "Call me if you need legal advice, or just a drink." He pulled up in front of my house, and I got out of the car with a grateful nod. The house greeted me with an emptiness and silence that felt almost like a blessing after an emotional evening. I turned on the light, mechanically took off my coat, and walked into the kitchen. Pouring myself a glass of water, I sat down at the table, and for the first time in this crazy day, allowed myself to relax. The events of the evening replayed in my mind like a movie. Quentin's shocked face when Daryl revealed the truth about my involvement in the house purchase. The confusion in Winship's eyes when she learned of my secret help. Quentin's pathetic attempts to apologize when he realized how much money was at stake. And my own decision to reject his apology, despite the temptation to reconnect with my daughter. I knew it was the right thing to do. A relationship built on money and gain will never be real. If Winship was ever going to come back into my life, it would have to be for real feelings, not money. The phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. Winship's name popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a second before answering it. Yes? "Daddy." Her voice sounded strained, shaking slightly. "Yeah." "I wanted to make sure you got home." "I just got here," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, a number." "I don't know," she stammered. "Quentin left. Said he was going to spend the night at a hotel. He was really pissed." I gripped the phone tighter. "Did he didn't hurt you?" "No," Winship answered quickly. "He was just yelling. Said I ruined everything by inviting you. That you ruined everything." There was a pause and I could hear her ragged breathing. "Daddy, why didn't you tell me about the money?" she finally asked. "Why did you do it in secret?" It was the question I had expected, a question to which I had no easy answer. "I knew Quentin wouldn't accept direct help from me," I said slowly. "And I wanted to help you, Winship. No strings attached, no strings attached. But $620,000, her voice trembled. "Wish, that's a lot of money. It was more important to me to know that you were living in a good home," I replied simply. "Money is just numbers in an account, and you are my daughter." There was silence again, longer this time. "I need to think," Winship finally said. "About all this, about Quentin, about you, about us. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Sure," I agreed, understanding her need for space. "I'll be waiting." After the conversation, I couldn't sleep for a long time, tossing and turning in bed. Scraps of phrases, images, and memories were running through my mind. Laurel holding newborn Winship in her arms, our daughter's first birthday, her high school graduation, which I missed due to a business trip, one of the many regrets that gnawed at me at night. The morning brought clarity of thought and determination. I got up early as usual and walked out onto the veranda with a cup of coffee. The sun was just rising, coloring the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. Laurel loved sunrises like this. "What would you do if you were me?" I asked quietly into the void where my wife had once stood watching the sunrise. There was no answer, but I knew what she would have said. She always said, "Give her space, Perry, but be there when you're needed." The day passed with the usual chores. I mowed the lawn, dealt with correspondence, went to the store for groceries. The mundane tasks helped structure time and not think constantly about Winship and what was going on at her house. The phone was silent all day, not a call or text from my daughter. I held back from calling her myself, realizing she needed time. In the evening, I decided to sort through old photo albums, an activity I'd been avoiding since Laurel died. Too many memories, too much pain. But now, after the events of the previous evening, I wanted to reconnect with the past, to remember how it all began. The albums were stored in the study, in the bottom drawer of the desk. I pulled out the oldest one, the one that began with the wedding photos and ended with the first few years of Winship's life. Yellowed pages, faded snapshots, happy faces. Here's Laurel in her wedding dress, her eyes shining with happiness. Here's she and I in our first apartment, small and cramped, but full of love and hope. Here's Winship, a newborn bundle in her mother's arms. Here she is, taking her first steps, holding my hand. I didn't notice a tear roll down my cheek. So much time missed, so many moments missed because of work, because of my desire to provide for my family financially, forgetting about equally important emotional needs. The phone rang around 9 p.m., but it wasn't Winship. An unfamiliar name popped up on the screen. Dash dash. Hello? Dash Mr. Hackett? A woman's voice, a little anxious. My name is Adelaide Bright. I live next door to your daughter. I straightened in my chair, immediately alert. Is something wrong? Perhaps, the woman replied. Quentin came back about an hour ago. He was very aggressive, yelling at Winship. I heard her ask him to leave, but he refused. Then he slammed the door and went into the bedroom. It's quiet now, but I'm worried. How did you get my number? I asked, getting up and looking for my car keys. Winship gave it to me a few days ago when she asked me to confirm some details about the housewarming party invitation, Adelaide explained. I thought you should know what was going on. Thank you for calling, Mrs. Bright, I said. I'll call my daughter. I immediately dialed Winship's number, but she didn't answer. I sent a text message asking if everything was all right, but there was no reply. The anxiety was building. I knew I shouldn't interfere, that Winship was a grown woman, capable of handling her own problems. But the image of Quentin, his angry face and controlling demeanor, kept me uneasy. I called Daryl, who answered after the third ringtone. Quentin is back in Winship, I said without preamble. According to the neighbor, he was aggressive. Winship isn't answering his cell phone. Are you going to go there? Daryl asked, instantly understanding the situation. I don't know, I answered honestly. I didn't want to make things worse, but I couldn't do nothing. Wait until morning, Daryl said. If she doesn't answer by then go. In the meantime, I'll contact my friend at the Fremont Police Department and ask him to look at their house. I agreed, understanding the logic of his advice. Having my father-in-law show up in the middle of a family quarrel wasn't likely to help the situation. In the morning, I awoke to the ringing of the telephone. It was Adelaide Bright calling again. Dash Mr. Hackett. Her voice sounded even more anxious than yesterday. The police were here last night. The neighbors called them when Quentin started screaming and breaking dishes. They took him away, but before they did, he yelled that he was going to come back and take what was rightfully his. I sat up on the bed, instantly awake. Is Winship okay? Physically, yes, Adelaide answered. But she seems devastated. I tried to talk to her after the police left, but she said she wanted to be alone. I thanked my neighbor for the information and immediately started packing. I threw a few things in my bag, not knowing how long I'd have to stay in Fremont, and got in the car. The drive seemed endless. I tried calling Winship, but she still didn't answer. When I finally pulled up to her house, it was about 10 in the morning. The street was quiet, with neighbors leaving for work and walking their dogs. No sign of the night's incident. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Knocked, called Winship by name. No response. I walked around the house, checking the windows. All closed. My anxiety was growing by the minute. She don't open? I heard a voice behind me and turned around. Standing in front of me was a short, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes. Are you Adelaide Bright? I asked, recognizing the voice I'd heard on the phone. She nodded. And you must be Father Winship. She looks just like you. I smiled weakly. Thank you for calling. Do you know if she has a spare key somewhere? Adelaide thought for a moment. I saw her pull something out from under a flower pot on the porch once. Maybe it was a key. I checked the 3 pots on the porch, and under the last one I found a small key wrapped in a plastic bag. Opening the door, I cautiously stepped inside, calling Winship by name. Silence. The living room was cleaned up, no sign of last night's conflict. I walked up to the second floor and stopped in front of the bedroom door. Winship? I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. It's Dad. Are you in here? I heard movement behind the door, then it opened. Winship stood in front of me, pale with dark circles under her eyes, but unharmed. Daddy? She blinked as if she couldn't believe it. What are you doing here? Your neighbor called. She told me about what happened last night, I answered. I was worried. Winship smiled weakly. Adelaide, of course. She watches the whole neighborhood like a hawk. I noticed that her hand holding the doorknob was trembling. May I come in? I asked. She nodded and stepped aside. The bedroom was spacious and bright, with a large bed and a panoramic window overlooking the backyard. There was a wedding ring on the bedside table. Quentin's not back? I asked, though the answer was obvious. No, Winship replied, sitting down on the edge of the bed. The police had taken him away, but he threatened to come back and she stammered. And what? I asked softly, sitting down next to her, but not too close so as not to violate her privacy. Take what's his, she finished. He meant half the house. Your half, I shook my head. Legally, he had no right to it. The trust fund was in your name. He said he'd find a way, Winship said quietly, that he had connections, that he'd make you regret interfering. I felt anger rising inside, but I held it back. Now was not the time for emotion. Right now, my daughter needed support and a clear head. Don't worry about it, I said. Daryl would take care of the legal side of things, and you. Are you okay? Winship stared out the window for a long time before answering. You know what's weird? I don't feel broken. Sad, yeah. Scared a little. But mostly, I feel relieved. She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity and determination. I think our marriage was doomed from the beginning. Quentin was always controlling me, always manipulating me, and I let him because... She paused, searching for words. Because I was afraid of being alone. After Mom died, you were all I had left, and we were so far apart. I'm sorry, Winship, I said quietly. For all the years I was physically there for you, but emotionally absent. For all the missed birthdays and school concerts. For not being the father you deserved. She shook her head. It was my fault too. I let resentments come between us. Let Quentin convince me that you didn't care about me. And all this time, I've always loved you. I just said it. And I always will, no matter what happens. Winship nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She moved closer and rested her head on my shoulder. I hugged her, feeling something warm blossom in my chest, something like hope. We sat like that for a while, not saying a word. Then Winship straightened up and wiped away her tears. What am I going to do next? She asked. With the house? With Quentin? With all this? It's your decision, I answered. But whatever you choose, I will support you. She smiled weakly. Thank you, Dad. At that moment, the doorbell rang. We looked at each other and I saw Winship's face tense up. It might be Quentin, she whispered. I'll get it, I said, getting up. Stay here. I went downstairs and went to the door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw not Quentin, but Adelaide Bright. I just wanted to make sure you found Winship, she said when I opened the door. And to tell you that if you need anything, food, company, anything, I'm here for you. I thanked her for her concern. By the way, Adelaide added, lowering her voice, this Quentin, has he always been so aggressive? I don't know, I answered honestly. My daughter and I haven't been very close in recent years. Adelaide nodded understandingly. Well, now you have a chance to fix that. And if you ask me, she'll be better off without him. He always seemed to me insincere. Smiles, says the right words, but his eyes are cold, you know? I nodded. Understood all too well. Anyway, Adelaide continued, I'll keep an eye on the house. If he comes back, I'll call the police right away. After my neighbor left, I returned to Winship, who had already gone down to the living room. That was Adelaide, I said. She was worried about you. She's nice, Winship replied. A little clingy, but kind. She used to bring me cookies when we first moved in. I noticed that on the coffee table was a folder of documents Daryl had left behind, the same ones that revealed my role in the purchase of the house. I was rereading them this morning, Winship said, following my gaze. You really did give up half your savings to help me, without even knowing if I'd ever find out. You're my daughter, I replied simply. The only thing I have left. Winship came over and hugged me, tightly and sincerely. You're not alone, Daddy, she whispered. Not anymore. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd left Fremont, leaving Winship to deal with her life. We'd called every day, sometimes several times. Short, awkward conversations gradually became longer and more sincere. She told me about her progress. She filed for divorce, met with a lawyer, started seeing a therapist. I shared my small daily triumphs, trimming the hedge, fixing a creaky step, cooking a stew from Laurel's recipe. I've been thinking a lot about the future these days. The house I'd lived in for almost 40 years suddenly seemed too big, too filled with memories. Every room, every object reminded me of the life that was left behind. My career as a real estate appraiser, Laurel and I's retirement plans, the hopes we had for Winship, it all belonged to the past. I woke up one morning with an unexpected clarity in my mind. A decision that may have been ripening in my subconscious mind for a long time was suddenly formed into a clear thought. It was time for a fresh start. In a new place, without the burden of past mistakes and disappointments. I opened my laptop and began searching for information about the small coastal towns up north where I'd always dreamed of living after retirement. Laurel loved the ocean. We often talked about how one day we would buy a small house overlooking the water and spend our evenings watching the sunset. That dream never came true in her lifetime, but perhaps now was a chance to fulfill at least part of it. I spent a few days researching options, contacting realtors, even going to see a couple houses in a town called Eleanor Cove. One of them, a small but cozy house with a terrace overlooking the bay, especially appealed. It stood on a slight rise and the bedroom windows had a splendid view of the water. Something about the place reminded me of Laurel. Perhaps the color of the sky at sunset or the smell of salt in the air. Back home, I made an offer on the purchase and began preparing for a possible move. I went through my belongings, deciding what to take with me and what to keep. There was a lot to give away or throw away. There had been too much in the house for 40 years. While sorting, I found an old box of Winship's children's drawings and crafts. Little palms printed on paper with bright colors, a crooked portrait of our family, 3 figures holding hands, a macaroni snowflake glued to cardboard and covered in glitter. Each piece was a little time capsule, preserving moments when we were truly a family. I was just arranging these treasures on the table when I heard the doorbell ring. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. I wasn't expecting guests. Opening the door, I saw Winship. She was standing on the porch dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair gathered into a careless bun, a small bag in her hands. "Hi, Daddy," she said with an uncertain smile. "Can I come in?" I silently stepped aside, letting her inside. She walked into the hallway looking around like she was seeing the house for the first time. In a way it was. She hadn't been here in years, not since her mother's funeral. "Are you cleaning?" she asked, noticing the boxes in the living room. "Something like that," I answered. "Would you like some coffee? Or maybe some wine?" "Coffee would be great," Winship nodded, following me into the kitchen. We were silent while I made coffee. I could feel her gathering her thoughts, formulating what she wanted to say. I didn't rush her. "I signed the divorce papers," she finally said when I set the cup in front of her. "Quentin did too. He was surprisingly easy to agree to my terms." "What terms?" I asked, sitting down across from him. "I leave him the car and all our joint savings," Winship replied, "and he gives up his claim to the house." I nodded. Quentin had always valued immediate gain over long-term investment. A house would be a burden to him, requiring care and attention. Money and an expensive car were more suited to his lifestyle. "Are you okay?" I asked, looking at her tired face. Winship stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, I thought I was going to feel devastated. 6 years of marriage, all the plans, all the hopes. But I actually feel relieved, like I've dropped a heavy backpack I've been carrying for too long." I nodded understandingly. I knew the feeling it had been there when I'd made the decision to move. "Adelaide says hi," Winship continued with a slight smile. "She thinks you're a hero. She says they don't make fathers like you these days." I chuckled. Adelaide was too kind to me. I was far from a perfect father. "But you were," Winship said quietly. "You always were, even when I didn't see it." She set the cup aside and looked me straight in the eye. Daddy, I came to apologize for all those years of pushing you away. When I let Quentin manipulate me into believing you didn't love me, when I didn't call, didn't write, didn't visit." Her voice shook, and I saw tears glisten in her eyes. "I was so wrong, and I'm so sorry for the time we lost." I reached across the table and covered her palm with mine. Winship, listen to me. You don't have to apologize. I've made a lot of mistakes too. I let work become more important than family. Missed too many moments in your life. I wasn't there for you when you needed me. But you've always been there for us, she argued. Financially, emotionally. Even when I was estranged, you continued to take care of me. Secretly paid for half the house? That was my responsibility as a father, I replied simply, and my desire as a man who loves you. Winship wiped away her tears and nodded. Dash, I know. I know now. And I want to try to make it right. Start over. Be a real family. I felt something tighten in my chest. Her words were something I'd dreamed about for years. But now that they were finally spoken, I realized it wasn't that simple. Winship, I began slowly, picking my words. What happened between us can't be fixed with one conversation or decision. It's a long process. Rebuilding trust, understanding, connection. It will take time, she nodded. I know, and I'm ready for it. I want to try, Dad. I really do. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd recently tidied up. The roses that Laurel loved so much were blooming again. I thought of the house in Eleanor Cove, of the new life I planned to start, and of Winship's words of hope and determination. I've made a decision, I said, turning to her. A decision that had been maturing for some time. I'm moving out, Winship. Her face changed, reflecting a mixture of surprise and disappointment. You're moving? Where? Why? I walked back to the table and sat down. To Eleanor Cove. It's a small coastal town up north. I found a house there. Small but cozy, overlooking the bay. But why? She said it again. You've lived here all your life. All your memories with your mom. That's why, I said softly. Too many memories. Too much past. I need a fresh start, Winship. In a place that doesn't remind me of every mistake, every missed opportunity. She looked at me with incomprehension. But we've only just begun to rebuild our relationship. If you leave, it doesn't mean we can't continue, I interrupted her. Phones, internet, visits. Distance doesn't have to be an obstacle. It might even help us build something new, without the weight of past hurts and expectations. Winship looked away, and I could see she was struggling with her emotions. When are you leaving? In 2 weeks, if everything goes according to plan, I answered. The deal on the house in Eleanor Cove is almost finalized, and I've decided. I took a deep breath. I decided to leave it to you. Her eyes widened. Me? But why? It's your house, Dad. This is where you lived with Mom. This is where all your stuff is. I'll take what's really important, I said, and the rest of it. It's just stuff, Winship. Just walls and a roof. And you. You're the only thing I have left of the life I built here. And I want you to have a place to come back to. A place that's all yours. But I have a house in Fremont, she objected. The one you helped me buy. I nodded. And it will still be yours. You can sell it or rent it out. That's your choice. But this house, the house where you grew up, I want you to have it. Not as a replacement for what I've missed out on all these years. Not as an attempt to buy your love, but as a symbol of my faith in our ability to start over, even if things aren't perfect. Winship was silent for a long moment, pondering my words. I watched the expressions on her face change. Surprise, doubt, understanding. Do you really want to leave? She finally said. Not a question, but a statement. Yes, I confirmed. I didn't make this decision yesterday, and I didn't make it because of you. I'm 68, Winship. I've spent most of my life working to secure a future that never came as I imagined it would. Now I want to devote my remaining years to myself. What makes me happy? What makes you happy, Dad? I've been thinking. No one had asked me that question in years, not even myself. The ocean, I answered. Sunrises over the water, the silence, the simple things, and knowing that you're okay, even if we don't see each other every day. Winship nodded, as if deciding something for herself. I understand, and I'll try to support your decision. It's not easy, though. I know, I said, and I appreciate that. But trust me, this is not the end of our story. This is a new chapter. She smiled weakly. Promise? I promise, I said, and this time I was sure I could keep that promise. We talked for a long time about the past, about the future, about plans, about hopes. Winship told me she was thinking of returning to the publishing job she'd left after her marriage to Quentin. I shared my thoughts about what I'll do in Eleanor Cove. Maybe I'll finally write that book about the real estate market I've been thinking about for years, or learn to fish, or just sit on the patio and watch the water. By the time the conversation came to an end, it was past midnight. I suggested that Winship stay the night, and she agreed. Her room, mothballed like a museum piece after she left for college, was waiting for her. Everything's the same, she said as she entered the room. It was like time had stopped. I couldn't bring myself to change, I admitted. Even when you didn't visit much. I liked knowing you had a place to come back to. Winship hugged me, tightly and sincerely. Hey, thank you, Daddy. I said goodnight to her and went to my room. As I lay in bed, I thought about our conversation, the decisions I had made, the future that lay ahead. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not exuberant joy, not euphoria, but a quiet, calm acceptance that life goes on, even when everything seems lost. The next 2 weeks passed with the hassle of moving. Winship came almost every day, helping pack, sorting, deciding what to keep and what to take. We found many forgotten treasures, old letters, photos, children's toys. Each item evoked memories, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter. On the last evening before we left, we sat on the veranda with glasses of wine, watching the sun go down. The garden was full of life. The flowers Laurel had planted, the butterflies flitting among them, the birds singing their evening songs. I'm going to miss this place, I admitted, but not as much as I thought I would. Winship looked at me with understanding. Because you take with you what's really important. Memories. Love. I nodded, and hope for the future. She raised her glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, touching my glass to hers. The next morning, the truck with my things left for Eleanor Cove. I planned to follow in my car. Winship came to see me off. She stood on the porch of the house that was now hers and watched me load the last of my bags into the trunk. I'll be there in 2 weeks, she said, if the invitation still stands. It always is, I replied. The door would be open. We hugged one last time. Not like Laurel's funeral, formal, tense, and not like when we were kids, with complete dependence and trust. It was like two adults who'd been through a lot and had decided not to let each other go, even when life took them in different directions. See you later, Daddy, Winship said, pulling away. See you later, Butterfly, I replied, using her childhood nickname. As I got into the car, I took one last look back at the house where I had lived most of my life. For a moment, I thought I saw Laurel standing next to Winship on the porch, but it was just a play of light and shadows. I started the engine and pulled into the driveway leading to the highway. Ahead lay the long road to Eleanor Cove, to a new home, to a new life. I didn't know what awaited me there. I didn't know if Winship and I could overcome the years of estrangement and build a real relationship. I didn't know if I would find what I was looking for: peace, meaning, happiness. But I did know one thing. Sometimes the best way to love is to let go. To let go of the past, to let go of resentments, to let go of expectations. And I was willing to let go in order to move forward, knowing that everything that really mattered would stay with me, no matter the distance or time.